A young dog shivered under a gray sky, where the clouds gathered like a fist ready to strike. His ginger fur, which must have once been as bright as an autumn maple, was now matted with clumps of mud, tangled with rain and dust, barely covering his protruding ribs that stuck out like the frame of an old umbrella. The streets of the big city buzzed around him. Cars roared and tires hissed on the wet asphalt. Pedestrians hurried by, wrapped in coats, their footsteps echoing in the alleys. No one noticed the tiny pup limping by the trash cans, his nose rooting through a pile of refuse. A crust of bread hard as a stone, a moldy apple core. Everything he found was a prize he had to fight rats for, whose eyes gleamed in the darkness. Night after night, he curled up in a cardboard box under the bridge, where the wind whistled like an angry whisper and the cold gnawed at his bones, making him whimper quietly, so the stray dogs or those who might kick him for no reason wouldn't hear him. Alone. That word pounded in his little head as he huddled against the damp wall. His eyes glistened with loneliness, and his paws trembled with exhaustion. The days blurred into a gray streak, like the endless rain that drummed on rusty roofs. Morning began with a search. He sniffed the sidewalks where the smells of food mixed with gasoline and garbage. He learned to slip between people's legs and dodge the janitor's broom that chased him away from the food stalls. Sometimes he got lucky. An old lady by the market would toss him a crust, but more often than not, he was left with an empty stomach, where hunger writhed like a beast, scratching from the inside. He found shelter under a rusty awning, where raindrops tapped on the metal like a metronome, counting his solitude. There in the shadows, he curled into a ball, tucking his paws to preserve the little warmth he had left. The city had no mercy. Cars roared, people shouted, and the small dirty dog was invisible in all the noise. But deep inside, under the layer of grime, a spark of hope glowed. He would lift his muzzle to a rare sunbeam that broke through the clouds and wag his tail, as if believing there was a warmer place somewhere where he wouldn't have to hide. His eyes, large and amber like two pieces of a sunset, looked at the world with a longing not for food, though hunger gnawed at him like a rat on wires, but for something more. He saw how children petted dogs on leashes, how the dogs wagged their tails and licked hands, and something in his chest tightened. He didn't remember his mother's warmth. He only knew cold asphalt and sharp shouts. Once a boy threw a stone at him. The dog yelped and jumped away but didn't bark back. He just flattened his ears and ran into an alley where the shadows hid him. There against the wall he lay, burying his nose in his paws, watching the world move on without him. Passers-by went by, their steps sounding like a drumbeat, and he remained just a speck of dirt against the city. But even in this loneliness he didn't lose hope. When a random pigeon pecked at crumbs nearby, he didn't chase it away. He watched it eat, as if sharing a meal that barely existed. At night the city changed. Streetlights reflected in puddles like stars fallen to earth. He lay in his box, listening to the wind howl under the bridge and the distant barks of a pack he didn't belong to. His fur was wet, his paws were numb, but he didn't move, afraid of losing his fragile shelter. Sometimes he whimpered not from pain but from the emptiness that grew inside him like a crack in the asphalt. He didn't know how many more nights he could endure, but each time he closed his eyes, he imagined something warm. Maybe a hand that wouldn't strike, or a corner where the wind didn't blow. The city slept and he waited, not knowing for what. His little heart beat steadily despite the hunger, cold, and loneliness, because a spark lived within it, the belief that tomorrow could be better. He pressed himself against the cardboard, his ears catching the rustling of the night, and in that noise, he searched for the sound of footsteps that would stop nearby, not pass him by. Hunger gnawed at him like a rusty nail. But he wasn't reckless. Every piece of food could be a trap, like that time when another dog, bigger and meaner, stole a crust from him, leaving only a scratch on his snout. The city hummed, cars roared, lights flickered, and somewhere in the distance, laughter sounded foreign and distant, not for him. He lifted his head, his ears twitching as he caught footsteps. Two people, a man and a woman in bright vests, walked straight toward him. Their voices were soft, but he knew adults were dangerous. He backed away, pressing himself against the wall. His eyes flashed with fear, but he didn't run. He had almost no strength left. The woman with short hair and tired eyes crouched a few steps away. Her voice was warm like a sunbeam breaking through the clouds. "Hey little one, don't be scared," she said, holding out a hand but not too close. The man beside her, with a beard streaked with gray, placed a bag on the ground that smelled of something familiar. Real food, not from the garbage. He froze, his nose twitching as he caught the scent. But his paws didn't move. He had seen people in these vests before. They took dogs away and they never came back. His heart pounded like a drum, but the woman's eyes, soft with wrinkles at the corners, held him like an invisible leash. She didn't move, just watched, and there was no threat in her gaze. Only something he didn't know but wanted to understand. The man, whose name was Jake, said quietly, "Look, Sarah, he's completely emaciated. His ribs are sticking out, his fur is one big clump." He spoke in a whisper, but the dog caught the concern in his voice. Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the pup. "Hold the bowl, let's try," she replied, pulling a metal bowl and a bag of food from her bag. The dry kibble rattled like rain on a tin roof, and the thick, meaty smell hit his nose. He involuntarily took a step forward, then immediately stopped. His ears flattened, his tail tucked. He wanted to believe, but the memory of kicks, shouts, and cold nights made him tremble. Sarah smiled, the corners of her lips trembling, and she placed the bowl on the ground, moving back a little. "We won't touch you, eat in peace," she said, and sincerity rang in her voice like a wind chime. Jake knelt beside her, his knees cracking, and he put a hand on Sarah's shoulder, as if supporting her patience. They were volunteers used to these encounters, to frightened eyes, trembling paws, and dogs that had forgotten what a home was. But this dog was different. In his amber eyes, despite the hunger and fear, a spark glowed. Not just a desire to survive, but something more, as if he was looking not only for food but for people who would stay. Sarah noticed it. Her fingers squeezed the edge of her vest and she whispered, "He's special, Jake. Look how he's watching us." Jake nodded, his beard twitching in a half-smile. They sat in silence, giving the puppy time while the wind blew scraps of newspaper across the asphalt and the city buzzed, oblivious to this quiet scene. The pup looked at the bowl, his nose trembling, catching the scent that promised an end to hunger. He took another step, then another. His paws slipped, but he didn't take his eyes off the people. They didn't move, didn't shout, didn't chase him away. It was strange. No one had ever waited for him before. No one had looked at him as if he mattered. His stomach rumbled like distant thunder, but he didn't rush to the bowl. Instead, he lifted his muzzle, looked at Sarah, then at Jake, and something like a question flickered in his eyes. He didn't know what trust was, but he felt these two were not like the others. Finally, he approached the bowl, touched the kibble, and licked one cautiously, as if tasting not food but the very possibility of believing. Sarah held her breath, her hands clenched, and Jake chuckled softly. "Go on, little one, eat." But he was in no hurry. He looked at them as if he wanted to say something he couldn't express. The alley fell silent, and in that moment, under the dim light of the street lamp, a thin, invisible but strong thread was born, connecting the lonely puppy and the two people whose hearts beat in unison with his. Sarah held the bowl, her fingers trembling slightly with tension, while the food glittered in the dim light of the street lamp. The small dog, with ribs showing under his dirty ginger fur, stood before her. His amber eyes darted between the food and the people. Jake knelt beside him, his knees cracking, and he exhaled softly, trying not to spook the pup. The scent of meat from the bowl was intoxicating, promising an end to the hunger that had tormented him for weeks. Sarah smiled, the corners of her lips turning up gently, and she whispered, "Eat, little one, it's for you." Her voice was like a warm breeze cutting through the cold evening, and the dog, though still trembling, took a step closer. His nose twitched, catching the aroma, and he licked a piece of kibble carefully, as if afraid the food would disappear like a mirage. Jake pulled a bottle of water and a small bowl from his bag, pouring a clear stream into it. "You need to drink too," he said, placing the bowl next to the food. His movements were slow and deliberate, like those of a person who knew a single sudden move could break the fragile thread of trust. The dog looked at the water, then at Jake, and his tail twitched. Not a wag, just a hint of movement, as if he was trying to believe. Sarah held her breath. Her eyes glistened with suppressed emotions. She had seen dozens of puppies like him, emaciated, terrified, with fur matted with dirt. But this one was different. His gaze, full of longing and hope, clung to her heart like a burr. "He wants to trust us," she whispered to Jake, and he nodded, his beard twitching in a half-smile. The dog lowered his head to the bowl. His teeth crunched on the kibble, and the sound, quiet but clear, echoed in the alley like the first chord of a new melody. He ate slowly, not greedily, as if tasting every morsel, afraid it would be his last. Sarah squeezed the edge of her vest, her fingers turning white, and a warmth grew in her chest, a mix of pity and joy. She knew how hunger could break a spirit, how it made one forget everything but survival. But this dog was in no hurry. His eyes would occasionally rise to the people, as if checking to see if they would leave or take the bowl away. Jake coughed quietly, hiding a smile. "Look, he's eating, but it's like he's saying thank you." Sarah nodded, her throat tightening, and she turned away to hide a tear that slid down her cheek. They waited, sitting on their haunches while he ate. Around them the city hummed, cars roared. A door slammed somewhere, but here in this corner of the alley time seemed to stand still. He finished the water, his tongue lapping in the bowl, and he lifted his muzzle, licking his lips. His fur, though dirty, gleamed under the street lamp, and his eyes shone brighter than they had a minute ago. Sarah slowly held out her hand, not touching him, just showing her palm. "We're here with you, little one," she said, her voice trembling like a string. The dog looked at her, his ears slightly raised, and he didn't jump back or growl. He just watched, as if weighing her words. Jake pulled a soft towel soaked in warm water from his bag and carefully wiped the puppy's paw, cleaning off the dirt. The dog flinched but didn't run away. His body tensed, then relaxed, as if he understood that pain wouldn't follow. When the bowl was empty, Sarah and Jake exchanged a glance, their faces glowing with a quiet victory. They had given him food, water, a moment of peace, his first in a long time. The dog sat on the asphalt. His tail lightly touched the ground, and he looked at them, not taking his eyes away. There was no fear in his gaze, only a question. What next? Sarah felt her heart clench. This puppy, small and fragile, was ready to trust despite everything the world had done to him. She leaned in a little closer, and her voice became quieter. "We're going to take you with us. You won't be alone anymore." Jake nodded. His hand rested on the bag where the leash and carrier were, but he wasn't in a hurry to take them out. They knew trust wasn't like food. It couldn't be given all at once. The alley fell silent. The street lamp flickered, and the dog looked at them, and in his amber eyes, a spark ignited, not just from being full, but from something bigger that was just beginning to grow. Sarah was still crouched, her breath misting in the cool alley air. The bowl in front of the dog gleamed with emptiness. The kibble was gone, leaving only a faint meaty smell clinging to the asphalt. Jake, leaning against the wall, watched the pup, his beard twitching in a smile. They had expected the small, emaciated dog to pounce on the food like a wolf cub, greedily and hurriedly swallowing pieces without chewing. After all, the hunger that tormented him was stronger than fear, stronger than exhaustion. But the dog surprised them. He ate slowly, carefully. His small teeth crunched on the kibble, and his amber eyes, like a sunset, kept looking up at the people, as if checking their intentions. Sarah clenched her hands, and her heart ached at that look. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, as if the puppy wanted to give something in return. He finished eating, licked his muzzle, and his tail twitched slightly, touching the cold asphalt. He looked at the bowl, then at Sarah, then at Jake. His paws, still dirty with a caked-on layer of earth, shifted, and he did something unexpected. He nudged the bowl with his nose towards Sarah. She froze, her eyebrows rising and her breath caught. "What are you doing, little one?" she whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. The dog nudged the bowl with his nose again, as if offering it to her, and his eyes glistened, full of a strange puppy sincerity. Jake coughed, hiding his surprise, and leaned closer. "Look, Sarah, he wants to share," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. Sarah slowly held out her hand, not touching the bowl, afraid of breaking the moment. She had seen hungry dogs before. They would growl, protecting every piece. But this dog was different. His small nose, covered in dust, pushed the bowl, and his tail wagged slightly as if he was saying, "You gave to me, now I give to you." Sarah felt her throat tighten and her eyes sting. She knew the puppy didn't understand the value of food the way humans did. But this gesture, this tiny push with his nose, was louder than words. "You don't have to, little guy, it's yours," she whispered, but her voice broke, and she turned away to hide a tear. Jake put a hand on her shoulder, his fingers clenching as if he too was fighting a lump in his throat. Not understanding their words but feeling their warmth, the dog took a step closer. His paws trembled, but he didn't back away. He looked at Jake, then nudged the bowl again, this time toward him, and his ears slightly perked up, as if he was waiting for a response. Jake laughed softly but genuinely and shook his head. "Well, what do you know, little guy?" he said, taking another handful of kibble from his bag and pouring it into the bowl. "Eat up, it's yours. We don't need it." But the dog didn't rush to the food. He sat down, his ginger fur gleaming under the street lamp, and looked at them, as if he wanted them to take at least a crumb. Sarah wiped her cheek with her sleeve and smiled, her face radiant like a morning beam. "He's not just eating, Jake, he wants us to be together," she said. Her words hung in the air, like a star that had broken through the clouds. The alley was silent. Only the distant hum of the city reminded them that the world was still moving. The dog, small and dirty, but with a heart as big as the sky, looked at his rescuers. He didn't know what a home was, but he felt these two were his chance. His gesture, that nudge of the bowl, wasn't just instinct. It was his attempt to say thank you, to offer a paw of friendship, to share the only thing he had. Sarah and Jake exchanged a look. Their eyes glistened with unshed tears. They understood that this puppy, whom they had found in the dirt, was already teaching them something. That even in emptiness, you can find something to share. Sarah slowly held out her hand, and this time the dog didn't jump back. He licked her fingers. His warm tongue touched her skin, and in that touch, hope was born, thin but unbreakable, like a thread connecting the three of them in the dim light of the alley. Sarah froze, her palms still warm from the dog's lick. As the alley whispered with the wind chasing stray leaves, Jake knelt closer, his knees scraping the asphalt, and he looked at the pup, whose amber eyes didn't leave their faces. The dog sat motionless, his tail twitching slightly, and his nose, still wet from the bowl, twitched, catching their scents, a mix of sweat, kindness, and street dust. He didn't growl or hide. He just watched, as if weighing every movement, her smile, his quiet sigh. In that look lay his whole story. Nights under the bridge where the echo of footsteps terrified him and loneliness burned like cold rain. Sarah swallowed, her fingers clutching the edge of her vest, and she whispered, "He's not just sharing, Jake, he's afraid we'll leave like everyone else." Jake nodded, his beard swaying, and he slowly held out his hand, not touching, just showing his palm. The dog tilted his head, his ears twitching, and he took a tiny step forward, his paws sliding in the dirt. This gesture, the nudge of the bowl, the lick of fingers, wasn't random. It came from a deep place where loneliness had taught him to cling to any moment of warmth. He remembered sharing crumbs with pigeons by the market, not chasing them away but waiting for someone to stay nearby so the rumbling in his belly wasn't so lonely. Now with these people, he was repeating the same thing, pushing the bowl with his nose once more, and his tail wagged wider, as if inviting them to sit closer, to share the circle of light under the street lamp. Sarah felt a pang in her chest, her eyes glistened, and she knelt down. The asphalt felt cold on her skin through her jeans. The dog didn't back away. He licked the air, then her sleeve. His warm tongue left a wet mark. His fragile body, with its protruding ribs, tensed, but not from fear, from the desire to hold on to this moment. Loneliness had made him this way. He dreamed of friends not in words but in images. A warm side next to him, running from the rain together. A shared shadow under an awning. Jake chuckled softly, pulling an apple from his bag and breaking it in half, offering a piece to the pup. The dog took it carefully with his teeth but didn't eat it right away. He nudged his piece toward Jake's leg. His eyes shone as if saying, "Eat with me, don't leave." Sarah wiped her cheek with her sleeve, and her breathing quickened and she whispered, "You see, he's willing to give up everything just not to be alone." The city noise in the alley quieted down. The street lamp flickered, casting shadows that danced around the three of them. The dog sat between them. His ginger fur faintly gleamed, and he licked his lips, looking from one to the other. This exchange of food, glances, and touches was his way of fighting the emptiness that gnawed at him more than hunger. He didn't know their names, but he felt it. These two were like the pack he had lost, and he clung to them with his paws, his nose, everything he had. Jake placed his hand on the ground, palm up, and the dog placed his paw on top. His claws lightly scratched the skin. Sarah smiled through the lump in her throat. Her fingers touched the pup's back, gently as a feather. In that moment, loneliness receded, leaving room for something new. A warmth that spread from their hands to his heart, promising that sharing meant sticking together. He whimpered softly, not from pain but from overflowing emotions, and pressed his side against Sarah's leg. His tail wagged rhythmically like a metronome of hope, and his eyes, half closed, caught their faces. He was not only sharing food, he was giving away his trust, crumbs gathered during nights of loneliness where every rustle was a threat. Now in this circle he dreamed of more. Running in the grass together, sleeping under the same roof, friends who wouldn't disappear with the dawn. Jake stroked his ear, his fingers sinking into the fur, and the dog licked his wrist, a warm gesture full of gratitude. Sarah leaned in. Her breath touched his muzzle and she whispered, "You're not alone, little one. We're with you." The dog responded with a wag. His body relaxed, and in the alley under the flickering street lamp, a bond was born, invisible but strong like roots growing from a seed of hope. Sarah carefully picked up the dog. His body, light as a feather, trembled in her arms, but he didn't struggle. His ginger fur, though dirty, gently brushed against her hands, and his amber eyes followed every movement as if asking, "Where to now?" Jake put the bowl and towel in the bag. His movements were quick but precise, like a person used to such rescues. "It's time, Sarah," he said, opening the door of an old van parked at the edge of the alley. Inside, it smelled of damp wood and dog hair, but it was warm, and Sarah placed the dog on a soft blanket spread on the seat. The pup snuggled into the fabric. His nose twitched, catching new scents, and his paws tucked under him, as if he was afraid of being thrown out. Sarah stroked his back, her fingers gliding over his protruding vertebrae, and whispered, "Everything will be okay, little one. We're going somewhere safe." The van started, the engine hummed, and the city outside the window blurred backward. Gray houses, flickering signs, faces of passersby who didn't notice the small life wrapped in a blanket. The dog looked out the window. His ears trembled with the vibration, and his eyes caught the reflection of the street lamps, like stars falling into puddles. He didn't know what a shelter was, but he felt the change, the warmth of the blanket, Sarah's soft voice, the absence of the wind that gnawed at him under the bridge. Jake, holding the steering wheel, glanced in the rearview mirror. His lips twitched in a smile. "He's doing great," he said, and Sarah nodded. Her hand lay on the pup's back like an anchor, holding him in this new world. He licked her fingers. His tongue was warm, and she felt her heart clench, not with pity but with pride for his bravery. When the van stopped by an old building with peeling paint, the dog lifted his head. The shelter smelled of life. Dog barks, damp earth, fresh-cut grass from the yard. Sarah opened the door and the sounds flooded in. The high-pitched yaps of puppies, the low woof of an adult dog, the creak of a gate. The dog tensed, his ears perked up, and his body coiled like a spring. Sarah felt him tremble and knelt beside him. Her voice was as soft as a blanket. "This is your new home. Until we find a better one. There are friends here." Jake got out of the van carrying a carrier, but Sarah shook her head. She wanted to carry the dog in her arms, so he could feel her warmth. They entered the shelter, where they were met by a woman with a long braid and tired eyes. "A new one?" she asked, looking at the pup. Her face softened when he lifted his muzzle, as if saying hello. Inside, the shelter was noisy but full of life. Kennels with soft bedding stood in rows. Dogs wagged their tails. Some barked, others pressed against the bars, begging for attention. Still in Sarah's arms, the dog looked at them. His nose trembled, catching the smells of food, soap, and other dogs. His heart pounded, but not from fear, from something new. The loneliness that gnawed at him on the street wasn't here. Sarah put him down on the floor in a small, quiet room where only a clock on the wall ticked. She took out a bowl, poured in some food, but the dog didn't rush to it. He looked at the woman with the braid, then at Jake, and his tail twitched, as if he wanted to call them closer. Sarah smiled, her eyes glistening. "Are you looking for friends already?" He took a hesitant step toward a kennel where a puppy with black fur yipped, wagging its tail. He stopped, his paws trembling, but he didn't back away. For the first time, he wasn't alone. Other dogs were around just like him with eyes full of stories. Sarah and Jake stood aside, watching him sniff the floor, then the air. His ears twitched, catching every sound. The woman with the braid, whose name was Jane, knelt beside him. She held out a piece of a treat. The dog took it carefully, not chewing right away, but looked at her, as if sharing the moment. Jane laughed, her laughter like the chime of a bell, and said, "This little guy is special." Sarah nodded, her hand squeezing Jake's shoulder. In that moment, the shelter wasn't just a place. It became a beginning, where he was learning to live again. Step by step, in the warmth of people's hands and the barks of new friends. Morning at the shelter began with a hubbub. Dogs barked, demanding food. Their paws rustled, and the voices of the volunteers rang like bells, giving out commands and laughter. The small ginger dog sat in the corner of his kennel. His amber eyes followed the movement outside the bars. His fur, not yet fully cleaned of street dirt, gleamed faintly in the lamplight, and his paws trembled, getting used to the new things. Warmth, the smell of fresh hay, and sounds that didn't scare him but called to him. He no longer huddled against the walls like he had in the alley, but he was still cautious, as if expecting this world to disappear like a mirage. Sarah entered the room, her steps light, and in her hands a bowl of food that smelled of meat. "Good morning, little one," she said. Her smile, soft as the morning light, reached him. He wagged his tail, for the first time, not just a twitch, but a wide wag like a flag in the wind. Jane, the woman with the braid, was already in the yard, where puppies raced across the grass, yapping and tumbling. She beckoned Sarah, pointing to the dog. Time for him to learn how to play. Sarah nodded, opened the kennel and crouched, letting him step out on his own. He came out slowly, his paws stepping hesitantly, his nose already drawn to the smells of grass, other dogs, and freedom. In the yard, the black puppy, the one who had yipped yesterday, ran up to him, wagging its tail like a propeller. He froze, his ears flattened, but then he nudged his nose into the new friend's side, and the other responded with a playful jump. Sarah held her breath. Her fingers squeezed the edge of her vest, and Jane laughed. "Look, he's already trying." He jumped clumsily. His paws got tangled, but he didn't give up, yipping back. And for the first time, his voice wasn't a whimper but a sound of joy. Day by day he learned. He chased the black puppy, whose name was Shadow, around the yard where the grass tickled his paws. They rolled on the ground, nipped at each other's ears, and he, though he fell from weakness, got up again. His eyes shone like two suns. The volunteers watched, their faces glowing with pride. Jake, coming in the evenings, brought treats and sat beside him, allowing him to lick his hand. The pup was no longer afraid of his movements and reached out to him as if to an old friend. One day when Jane was stroking him, he lay on his back, exposing his belly, a gesture of trust he hadn't shown in the alley. Jane wiped away a tear, her fingers sinking into his ginger fur, and she whispered, "You're a good boy, little one, you're almost home." But the shelter wasn't just for play. He was learning to trust people. Their hands that didn't hit, their voices that didn't yell. When Sarah cleaned his fur with a soft brush, he flinched at first, but then closed his eyes, enjoying the warmth of her palms. He learned not to hide food, not to growl when someone approached his bowl, but to share, just like that day in the alley when he nudged the bowl toward Sarah. With the other dogs, he was cautious but curious. He sniffed an old dog with a gray muzzle that slept in the corner and nudged a toy toward Shadow when he looked sad. His heart, once clenched with loneliness, was opening like a flower in the sun, and each day brought a new lesson. Running without fear of falling, barking without fear of being heard. By evening, when the yard was empty, he sat by the fence watching the sunset. His tail lay on the grass and his nose caught the scents of food from the kitchen, flowers from the garden, warmth from the people passing by. Sarah sat beside him, her hand on his back, and he pressed against her. His breathing was even, like the rhythm of a new life. "Have you found friends, little one?" she said, her voice trembling with joy. The pup looked at her, his eyes glistening, and he licked her cheek, leaving a wet trail. The shelter buzzed around them with barks, rustling, and the laughter of volunteers. But for him, it was no longer just a shelter. It was a world where he was learning not to be alone, where every step toward other dogs, toward people, toward play was a step toward a new self, brave, trusting, and ready to love. The sun broke through the gaps in the shelter's curtains, casting golden streaks on the floor where he lay, a ball clasped in his paws. His ginger fur, now clean, gleamed, and his amber eyes followed the movements of the volunteers bustling around the room. The barks of the dogs, the clinking of bowls, Jane's laughter spreading warmth, all of it had become home to him, but not forever. Sarah knelt beside him, her fingers gliding over his ear, and she said softly, as if sharing a secret, "We'll find you a family, little one." He nudged his nose into her palm. His tail twitched, but a shadow flickered in his eyes. He didn't know what a family was, but he felt it was more than the shelter, more than playing with Shadow or getting treats from Jake. Jane stood by the bulletin board, tacking up a photo of the dog. His face, slightly tilted with a spark in his eyes, shone on the paper. "This guy is special," she said, turning to Sarah. "We need to find people who will understand his heart." The volunteers knew he wasn't just a puppy. His willingness to share, his soft gaze, his cautious trust required people ready to love just as generously. Sarah nodded, her throat tight, and she took out her phone to post an announcement on social media. The photo of him holding the ball, looking into the camera as if into the future, was shared across groups. Ginger puppy seeks a home, loves to share, and dreams of a family. Messages poured in almost immediately, questions, praises, but Sarah and Jane exchanged a serious look. They weren't just looking for owners, but for those who would become everything to him. A few days later, a couple came to the shelter. A woman with warm eyes and a man with a quiet voice, whose hands smelled of wood and paint. Their names were Anna and Paul. Anna knelt by his kennel. Her fingers lingered at the bars, and she smiled when the pup reached his nose toward her hand. "He really is special," she said, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. Paul stood beside her. His gaze softened when he nudged a ball through the bars toward him, as if inviting him to play. Jane watched, her braids swaying as she leaned toward Sarah. "They're a good fit, aren't they?" Sarah nodded, but her heart ached. She had grown attached to him, to his wagging tail, to his habit of licking her fingers, and the thought of saying goodbye was like a knife. But she knew the shelter was just a bridge, and he deserved a real home. Anna and Paul spent an hour with him in the yard, playing. The pup chased the ball, his paws bouncing, and his tail spinning like a propeller. When Anna offered him a treat, he didn't eat it right away. He ran to Paul, nudged his nose into his knee as if offering to share. Paul laughed, his eyes glistening, and he petted him. His fingers sank into the ginger fur. "It's like he knows us," he said, and Anna nodded, her hand gripping her husband's. Sarah watched them from a distance, feeling a warmth grow inside her. These two saw in him not just a dog, but a friend ready to share everything from food to joy. Jane pulled out an application, her pen gliding across the paper, asking questions. Do you have a yard? How often are you home? Are you ready for puppy mischief? The answers were sincere. Their voices were steady, and Sarah found herself thinking that this was it. By evening, when the sun had set behind the roofs, Anna and Paul signed the papers. He sat at their feet, his face turned up, his eyes shining, asking, "What's next?" Sarah hugged him one last time, her fingers trembling in his ginger fur, and whispered, "Be happy, little one." Jake, standing by the gate, nodded at them. "You've found each other." Anna took the leash, her eyes glistening, and Paul stroked him, promising, "We'll come get you in a week." He nudged his nose into his hand, wagging his tail, as if he already knew they were waiting for him. The shelter fell silent. The volunteers watched the new family's van drive away, and Jane wiped a tear, whispering, "He'll be happy." Sarah nodded, her heart beating steadily, knowing that he had found people who would love him just as much as he loved them.